Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for April 13th, 2023. I'm going to be discussing today the latest bombshell revelations from investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, which were published yesterday under the title Trading with the Enemy. Some of you may remember in May 2022, when the Congress passed a measure for an additional $40 billion or so in funds for the Ukraine war against Russia, that Senator Rand Paul blocked the bill by demanding that there be an appointment of an inspector general to monitor the flow of funds and weapons going into Ukraine. This was in part due to his concern about the volume of money that was going into the war, but also due to the reputation of Ukraine, well-deserved, as a center of corruption. Immediately, Senators Schumer and McConnell, the war hawks heading the Democrat and Republican parties in the Senate, opposed Paul's motion, and a week later the funding bill passed, with only 11 senators voting in support of Rand Paul's motion to set up an inspector general. Now, by now, a total of over $100 billion of U.S. funds have been funneled into Ukraine with no oversight, with reports that some of these weapons are ending up in far-flung theaters, such as in Nigeria, and that there's people inside Ukraine who are becoming rich at the expense of the U.S. taxpayer and at the expense of the people of Ukraine who are being devastated by this continuing NATO war against Russia. Now, for those who criticize Senator Paul's actions, they should read the latest column posted by Seymour Hersh, The Trading with the Enemy. Again, it was in April 12th on his Substack column. What Hersh reports on is the corruption in Ukraine, including among top officials of the president's office, Zelensky's office, and military officials. Now, he begins by talking about the expense for providing diesel fuel for the war effort, pointing out that in Afghanistan, the Pentagon was paying as much as $400 per gallon to transport diesel gasoline from a port in Pakistan into Afghanistan. He said it's known. Well, what's not known is that the Ukrainians are still buying diesel from Russia, a nation that they're at war with, and that the Ukrainian president and many in his entourage, I'm quoting now from Hersh's article, many in his entourage have been skimming untold millions from the American dollars earmarked for diesel fuel payments. One estimate Hersh cites from CIA analysts put the embezzled funds at $400 million last year. And they're comparing this to the corruption that went on in Afghanistan. Now, Hersh then reports on the January meeting that CIA Director William Burns had with Zelensky in Kiev, and that he delivered a message, which an intelligence official told Hersh was like a mafia-style message. He told Zelensky that there are many in his entourage and government officials and senior generals who are angry that Zelensky was, quote, taking a larger share of the skim money than was going to the generals. And Burns presented Zelensky with a list of 35 generals and senior officials whose corruption was known to the CIA and others in the American government. And he reports that Zelensky responded to American pressure by dismissing 10 of the most outrageous of these officials. But that the problems continued. More importantly, what's reported by Hersh is that there's a total breakdown of trust between the White House and elements of the intelligence community. He said, I've been told repeatedly that warning about the strident ideology and lack of political skill shown by Secretary of State Blinken and National Security Advisor Sullivan. He writes, the president and his two main foreign policy advisors live in different worlds than the experienced diplomats and military and intelligence officials assigned to the White House. Now, he goes on to write, there's a total breakdown between White House leadership and the intelligence community, according to the intelligence official who reported to him. And Hersh points out that this was similar to what he reported last February about the opposition to Biden's plan to blow up the Nord Stream pipelines. And then he goes on to say, the official told me there's no strategy for ending the war. What's going to happen in this war? He said that there's yet to be an assessment of how to end it. But then he reports another bombshell, that there's a brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division training from a base inside Poland, a few miles from the Ukrainian border. And that secondly, there's a brigade from the 101st Airborne Division deployed in Romania. Now, some of that's been reported before, but what Hersh points out is that when you add the administrative and support units for this, truck drivers and others, you're talking about possibly 20,000 deployed by the United States on the borders of Ukraine. Now, he goes on to say that the juniors, referring to the Blinkens and the Sullivans, are running the show. There's no NSC coordination, and the U.S. Army is getting ready to go to war. And he quotes someone who says, this is not just bad leadership, there is none, zero leadership. Now, he then draws the conclusion, what happens, given that the war is not going well, if the decision is made by Biden that the United States can't allow Russia to win the war and the U.S. moves into the war? And here's his final paragraph. If worse comes to worse for the undermanned and outgunned Ukraine army in the next few months, will the two American brigades join forces with NATO troops and face off with the Russian army inside Ukraine? Is this the plan or hope of the American president? Is this the fireside chat he wants to give? If Biden decides to share his thoughts with the American people, he might want to explain what two Army brigades, fully staffed and supplied, are doing so close to the war zone. So that's the Hersh article. And again, I recommend that people find it and read it. Now, this bombshell coincides with another major story that's got a lot of traction, but not much clarity and transparency, about what's described as a major leak of Pentagon documents that's being compared to the damage done by the Snowden leak. These leaks confirm what Hersh is reporting, that there are opposing voices to Biden and his junior varsity team of Blinken and Sullivan and others. And there were several senior analysts who are well known to the Schiller Institute who have been quoted on what's going on, including James Jatras, a former chief staffer at the U.S. Senate, and former CIA analyst Ray McGovern. Now, Jatras said that these leaks indicate that there are some dissident voices within the U.S. government who are not comfortable with the direction of policy. They would like to slow it down or maybe even change its course. But there's still a distinct minority within the establishment. And he goes on to report that it's likely that the leak came from the Defense Department, not the State Department. And Jatras said, quote, there are people within the military who realize that we're moving toward a potential disaster in Ukraine. Those are more realistic people, those familiar with the hard facts of military power, while the State Department and the White House, quote, believe their own propaganda. And he said that there's a tradition of using leaks to try and change policy. For example, the WikiLeaks stories on Afghanistan, or the stories coming out from Afghanistan, the Pentagon papers on that. But he said this takes a while to change policy. What's going to go on in the meantime? And this is where Hersh is warning that we could be directly involved in a war without people knowing that that's the intention of the White House. Now, Ray McGovern, in his comments on this, said that it's likely that these leaks come from somebody who has access to highly sensitive information, probably at the Joint Chiefs of Staff level, who decided, my God, if the American people knew this, maybe we could stop this terrible, inexorable drift toward wider war in Ukraine and perhaps including nuclear weapons. And McGovern said that there are some people shown by this leak. There are some people in Washington who are trying to find their off-ramp, and they need to expose the lies that have been told by people like the defense secretary and the head of the CIA. So these leaks are significant. You put these two stories together, and what do we see? We're heading toward a danger of a wider war that could lead to nuclear war that we're being lied about constantly. The question then is, how will this be stopped? And I think the report by Hersh, the discussions by people like Jatras and McGovern have to get out to a wider audience, because it's clear to most of the world that the situation in Ukraine is a disaster already, which could become much worse because the people who are accountable or who are responsible for this have not been held accountable. There are calls for investigations into the leaks. Well, how about investigating Hersh's previous bombshell, that Biden ordered the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines? How about bringing in the Department of Navy to discuss the possibility that it was Navy divers who were planning the explosives? So instead of searching for leakers, how about holding accountable those whose lies and cover-ups that are being leaked about are pushing us into a war that could become a nuclear war? I urge you to register for the Schiller Institute conference taking place this Saturday and Sunday. The registration link is at the bottom of the description page. We'll have many people who have inside information and knowledge about what's going on, who will be informing you and organizing you to join us to make sure that we stop this drift toward World War III and nuclear war. So thanks for joining me. Tomorrow is Friday. I'll be taking your questions. Send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and weekly magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.